Hello and welcome to my Week 1 NFL and Lions review, looking at every game from the past week in the NFL and spending a little bit of extra time taking a look at the Detroit Lions and how they played in an impressive victory over the LA Rams. Let's get started with a quick look around the league, starting with the Thursday night opening game between the Chiefs and the Ravens in a really exciting matchup and a rematch of the AFC title game from last year. While Baltimore was able to hang in there and nearly were able to score the touchdown to tie the game up and show that it really is a game of interest or inches, Kansas City was able to come away with a victory 27-20, and the two-time defending champions are fighting to uh, get that third straight championship and are off to a good start. Although both teams put together pretty nice performances and are teams that I definitely see going on a deep run this year, or at least both teams are capable of that. At Lamar and the Ravens offense certainly looked great. It was a little bit surprising to see that Derrick Henry wasn't as involved as you might expect, not getting as many touches as you would think. I'm sure he's going to be used plenty this year. And in the time that he was used, he showed that he is going to be a very valuable member of this team. Then going to the Friday night game between the Packers and the Eagles. The Eagles come away with a victory despite some sloppy play early. Both teams look very competitive and look like they have a great shot at going into the playoffs. However, Green Bay, with just a few seconds left in the game, had to deal with a pretty brutal injury to Jordan Love. Luckily, it was not season ending. He should hopefully be back in a few weeks, although there is no official timetable at the time of this recording for when he will come back. He should be back soon, although if I were a Packers fan, I would certainly be upset with the fact that playing on that field in Brazil, where players were slipping the entire time, may have led to an injury to your quarterback. And while he's not going to miss too much time, it certainly could be enough to affect their chances in the playoffs and in this division, although hopefully it will not cause too many problems for them. Then on to the Sunday games. The Buffalo Bills beat the Arizona Cardinals 34-28. And while there may be some surprise by the fact that Arizona was able to at least stay fairly close and keep it competitive throughout most of the game. I had mentioned last week that I thought Arizona would be a surprisingly good team, although the thing that was the biggest surprise from them was the fact that Marvin Harrison Jr. was not more involved. I know that he is in his first game. He's a rookie. However, I still thought that we would see a little bit more from him, considering what a great prospect he is and what a high draft pick he was. However, Arizona's still able to keep it competitive, but Buffalo at home got the win and are looking strong early on. Josh Allen is good as always. So, I think we're going to see them continuing to contend and play well all year. So it was a very nice start for Buffalo. It was not as good of a start for the Cincinnati Bengals, who fell 16-10 to the New England Patriots at home in the biggest upset of the week. I mean, if it weren't for Northern Illinois beating Notre Dame, I would say this was the biggest week upset in all of football, but we'll just settle for the NFL. The Patriots, going with Jacoby Brissett, were able to upset the Bengals. Now, the Bengals did have some issues, T. Higgins having an injury, and of course, Jamar Chase missing a lot of time with his contract holdout leading up to the season. However, it's still surprising that this team was, not able to pull away with a home victory against the Patriots team that I think a lot of people could see as a bottom 5 or a bottom 3 team in the NFL this year. However, the Bengals, since they've brought in Joe Burrow, have been great, but have been known to struggle in week 1 in the first few weeks of the season. So I'm not going to be one of those people who will overreact and say that this is a doomsday scenario for Cincinnati or their season's over, but it was a very disappointing start. Minnesota, on the other hand, had a great start with a 28-6 victory over the New York Giants, although the Giants, a team that I said might be near the bottom of the entire league, and I thought they'd be fighting with the Panthers for the last spot, and that looks like that could certainly be the case. Daniel Jones really struggled. Saquon Barkley, he scored 3 touchdowns for the Eagles, but meanwhile, the Giants, his former team, couldn't score 7 points the entire game, so it's just showing that things are going to be rough in New Jersey this year, at least for the Giants, although we'll get to the other team that plays there in a moment. And we were talking about the Giants and the Panthers both struggling. The Panthers had a really rough game in New Orleans against their division rival Saints, losing 47-10. And I'm trying to hold out hope that Bryce Young can be a pretty good quarterback. And while, again, week one is way too early to say that he's, a bust or the season's gone, it was a really disappointing start. It was also a very disappointing start for another second-year quarterback, Will Levis, as the Titans fell to the Bears 17-24, and a lot of it was self-inflicted. The Titans really struggled. They kind of just gave the game to the Bears because Chicago's offense was not clicking. Caleb Williams struggled in his first game, throwing for fewer than 100 passing yards, but Will Levis's turnovers certainly contributed to the Titans losing, and the Bears pull away with a big victory. Meanwhile, the Steelers pull away with a win over the Falcons despite not scoring a touchdown, and they also have sole possession of the AFC North. So there's something to be said about that. Meanwhile, the Dolphins beat the Jaguars 20-17 between two teams that I think are going to be pretty good this year. I'm not losing much hope in Jacksonville, but Miami's victory was very impressive. Speaking of two teams in the AFC that I think could be very impressive this year, the Texans beat the Colts. It ended up being more of a shootout than I think a lot of people expected, just due to the fact that Anthony Richardson had two absolute bombs, some great long passes for touchdowns as well as a rushing touchdown. But the Houston Texans, the team that I picked to win the AFC this year, looked especially strong, coming away with a victory against their division rivals. Meanwhile, the Chargers won 22-10 over the Raiders. I'm a little bit more concerned with the Raiders now than I thought I would be. I thought they'd be a little better than expected. And again, it's early long season, but it was not an impressive start, although maybe it's something to be said about the Chargers and their defense looking better than expected. Speaking of strong defenses, the Seahawks were able to do pretty well defensively as well as offensively in a win against the Broncos. But I mentioned the defense because Denver, going out there with a rookie quarterback in his first game, struggled a lot, and Seattle was able to force some turnovers to come away with a 6-point victory. Meanwhile, Dallas just buried the Cleveland Browns 33-17. Dak Prescott got his extension before the game, and he really played like he earned it. He was incredible. Meanwhile, Deshaun Watson played like he has the worst contract in the NFL, and that's because he does. He looked horrible. I know Dallas has a good defense. I know they had a good defense last year, and they are a playoff team, but boy, oh boy, did he look especially rough. That was the type of performance where I don't really see him playing well against most teams if he plays anywhere close to that poorly. However, a surprisingly good game came from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who came away with a 37-20 win against the Commanders. Now, the Commanders also had a rookie quarterback making his NFL debut, but you know what? Jaden Daniels was able to sort of pick it up a little bit late. He had some pretty decent stats. Tampa Bay, a big part of their victory was just because of the fact that they are a very good team. They might be the most underrated team in the league. They've been to the playoffs the last few years. They were in the NFC divisional round last year. They got a playoff win against the Eagles. I think a lot of people just look at this as the team that Tom Brady just came in and saved, but they were okay before him. They definitely need to improve at the quarterback position, but they had talent outside that. They still have talent, and they had a pretty convincing victory. And then last night, speaking of convincing victories, Monday night, the 49ers beat the Jets 32-19. San Francisco looked dominant. They showed why they won the NFC last year. They just looked like a great Super Bowl caliber team. Meanwhile, the Jets did not. And again, Aaron Rodgers is, I mentioned it last week, he's 40 and he's coming off that major injury. So I know that definitely played a factor. It was not a particularly strong game, but again, they started off on the road with a really rough team, and none of these games should be taken too seriously just because of the fact that it is week one, although some of these performances are, some of these losses were certainly ones you might want to have some concern about, or at least for teams you might want to monitor whether or not they're really able to recover from some of these or how they're going to recover from some of these. Meanwhile, some of the wins were pretty impressive. And then there was a game on Sunday night between two teams that both looked pretty good. And the fact that the Lions were able to beat the Rams in overtime 26-20 was great. And I'm a Lions fan, and I pick them to win not only the division and the conference, but win the whole thing this year. I think they are champions. I think they will win the Super Bowl. And while that wasn't the most amazing victory, losing a 17-point lead was, pretty rough, and then having to make a comeback late in the game and go to overtime is a little bit disappointing, but it's just the reality of football sometimes. You're two playoff teams from last year facing off in a game that's look, the emotions were high in this one. I mean, the Lions were, have their baggage with the Rams, Goff's former team, Stafford's former team in Detroit, where there wasn't exactly a warm welcome the last time Stafford was here. So it was a very personal game for everybody involved. And Detroit was able to pull away with the win. And while the defense for the Lions looked really promising early on, the fact that the Rams were able to continue to run plays despite having an injured O line and just kept having these short plays in order to quickly move themselves down the field and manage to chew up the clock really helped. And the fact that or helped their offense and hurt the Lions offense, and the fact that the Lions offense had some issues in the second half really hurt. And it put a lot on the defense. They had to stay on the field a lot longer than they were expected to, and eventually it led to some cracks later on, especially when LA was getting some momentum swings. But the Lions offense still did enough to win. David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs are the best running back duo in the NFL. The O-line's the best in the NFL. Now, the passing game was not the best this week. And, Jared Goff, I don't think had a bad game, but, I mean, he even said in his own press conference after the game, his play was not up to his own standards. And he had to make some adjustments. But luckily, Jameson Williams was able to step up in the way that we needed him to. And he not only caught a big touchdown, but he caught 5 passes. He had over 100 receiving yards. He wasn't just the guy who was used on 1 or 2 specialty plays like he had been in a lot of games last year. He was actually stepping up as the number 1 receiver in that game, and he looked like a good wide receiver too throughout the year. And then, of course, David Montgomery, that final drive was unbelievable, but also wasn't too shocking considering just how good he looked early on in the game. He was really the focal point of this offense until Jameson Williams was able to pick things up a bit. And at the end, he was not going to be denied, and he comes away with a big win. Still a long season, still a lot of things to get figured out, but a really encouraging start for the Lions as they go to Tampa next week. And speaking of next week, we're going to go with the game picks. I have the Bills beating the Dolphins on Thursday. I have the Ravens over the Raiders, Jaguars over the Browns. I have the Jets over the Titans, 49ers over the Vikings, Chargers over the Panthers, the Seahawks over the Patriots, a lot of road wins all in a row. But then I have the Cowboys over the Saints. I have the Commanders beating the Giants, the Lions beating the Buccaneers, Colts over the Packers. I have the Rams over the Cardinals, the Steelers beating the Broncos, the Chiefs beating the Bengals, the Texans beating the Bears, and I have the Eagles beating the Falcons. Thank you all for tuning in once again, and hopefully we'll have another good week of football before the recap video next week. Thanks, and have a good one.